How the economy machine works in 30 minutes. The economy works like a simple machine, but many people don't understand it, or they don't agree on how it works, and this has led to a lot of needless economic time suffering. I feel a sense of responsibility to share my simple but practical economic template. Though it's unconventional, this helped me to anticipate to sidestep global financial crisis. Global financial crisis. Though it's unconventional, it's helped me to anticipate to sidestep for global financial crisis, and it's worked well for me for over 30 years. Let's begin. Though the economy might seem complex, it works in a simple mechanical way. It's made up of a few simple parts and a lot of simple transactions that are repeated over and over again a zillion times. These transactions and above all else driven by human nature, and they create and the three main forces drive the economy. Number one, productivity growth. Number two, the short-term debt cycle. And number three, the long-term debt cycle. Well, look at these three forces, how laying them on top of each other create good template for tracking economic movements and figuring out what's happening now. Let's start with the simplest part of it, transactions. An economy is simply the sum of transactions and make it up. And a transaction is a very simple thing. You make transactions all the time. Every time you buy something, you create the transactions. Each transaction consists of a buyer exchanging money or credit with the seller for goods, services, or financial assets. Credit spending just like money. So adding together money spent and the amount credit spent, you could note the total spending. The total amount spending drives the economy. If you divide the amount spent by the quantity sold, you get the price. And that's it. That's it. Transactions. It's a building block the economy machine. All cycles, all processes in an economy driven by transactions. So if you understand transactions, you can understand the whole economy. A market consists of all the buyers, all the sellers making transactions for the same thing. For example, there is a wheat market, a car market, a stock market, or market is millions of things. An economy consists of all of the transactions all of its market. If you add up the total spending and total quantity sold in all of the markets, you are able to need to want to understand the economy. It's just that simple. People, businesses, banks, and governments all engage in transactions we just described, exchanging money in credit for goods, services, or financial assets. The biggest buyer and seller is the government, which consists of two important parts. A central government that collects taxes and spends money, and a central bank, which differs from buyers and sellers because it controls the amount, and credit economy. It does this by influencing interest rate and printing new money. For these reasons, as well stated, the central bank is an important player in the flow of credit. I want to pay attention to credit. Credit is the most important part of the economy, and probably it is understood. It's the most important part of it because it's biggest and most volatile part. Just like buyers and sellers go to the market to make transactions, so do lenders and borrowers. Lenders usually want to make their money to into more money, and borrowers usually want to buy something they can afford, buy a house or a car, where they want to invest in something like starting business. Credit can help both lenders and borrowers get what they want. Borrow promise to repay the amount borrowed called principal, plus additional amount called interest. When interest rates are high, there is less borrow because it's expensive. When interest rates are low, borrowing increases cheaper. When borrowers promise to repay and all lenders believe them, credit is created. Any two people can agree create credit out of the air. That seems simple enough, but credit is tricky because it's different its name. As soon as credit, it immediately turns into debt. Debt is both an asset to the lender and a liability to the borrower. In the future, when the borrower repays the loan plus interest, the asset and the liability disappear and the transaction is settled. So why is credit so important? Because when a borrower receives credit, he is able to increase the spending. And remember, spending drives the economy. This is because one person's spending is another person's income. Think about it. Every dollar you spend, someone else earns, and every dollar you earn, someone else spends. So when you spend more, someone else earns more. When someone's income rises, it makes the lenders more willing to lend him money because now he's more worthy of credit. A credit-worthy borrower has two things: ability to repay and collateral. Having a lot of income in relation to this debt gives an ability to repay. In the event that you repay, he has valuable asset used as collateral that can be sold. This makes lenders feel comfortable lending him money. So increased income allows increased borrowing, which allows increased spending. And since one person's spending is another person's income, this leads to more increased borrow and so on. This self-enforcing pattern leads to economic growth and is why we have cycles. In a transaction, you have to give something in order to get something. And how much you get depends on how much you produce. Over time, learn and the accumulated knowledge raises our living standard. We call this productivity growth. Those who are inventive and hardworking raise their productivity and their living standard faster than those who are complacent and lazy. But that is necessarily true of the short run. Productivity matters most long run, but credit matters most short run. This is because productivity growth doesn't fluctuate much, so it's not a big driver economy swings. That is because it allows and consume more, it produces more required. Those who are inventive and hardworking raise their productivity and their living standard faster than those who are complacent and lazy. But that isn't necessarily true of the short run. Productivity matters most in the long run, but credit matters most in the short run. This is because productivity growth doesn't fluctuate much, so it's not a big driver of economy swings. That is because it allows us to consume more than we produce when we acquire it, and it forces us to consume less than we produce when you have to pay it back. When you have to pay it back. That swings occur into big cycles. One takes about 5 to 8 years, and the other takes about 75 to 100 years. Less than it produced where you have to pay it back. That swings occur into big cycles. One takes about 5 to 8 years, and the other takes about 75 to 100 years. When most period swings, they typically don't see the cycles because they see them too up close, day by day, week by week. In this chapter, we're going to step back, look at these three big processes and how they interact and make up borrowing spreads. Experience. As mentioned, swings around the line are not due to how much innovation or hard work there is. They are primarily due to how much credit there is. Let's for a second imagine an economy without credit. In this economy, the only way I can increase my spending is to increase my income, which requires me to be more productive and more work. Increases productivity is the only way from growth. Since my spending is another person's income, the economy grows every time I or anyone else is productive. If we follow the transactions and play this out, we see a progression, like the productivity growth line. But because we borrow, we have cycles. This is due to any law or regulation. It's due to human nature and the way the credit works. Think of borrowing as simply a way of pulling spending forward. In order to buy something you can't afford, you need to spend more than you make. To do this, you essentially need to borrow from your future self. In doing so, you create a time in the future that you need to spend less than you make in order to pay it back. It very quickly resembles a cycles. Basically, anytime you borrow, you create a cycles. This is true for an individual as it is for the economy. This is why understanding credit is so important because it sets into motion a mechanical, protective series of events that will happen in the future. This makes credit different from money. Money is what you settle transactions with. When you buy a beer from a bartender with cash, the transaction is settled immediately. But when you buy your beer credit, it's like starting a bartender. You saying promise to repay in future. Together, you and the bartender created an asset and a liability. You just created a credit out of thin air. In order to pay the bartender later that the asset and the liability disappear, the debt goes away and the transactions is zero. The reality is that most of what people call money is actually credit. The total amount of credit in the United States is about $50 trillion. And the total amount of money is only about $3 trillion. Remember, in an economy without credit, the only way increases spending is to produce more. But in an economy with credit, you can also increase spending by borrowing. As a result, an economy with credit has more spending and allows incomes to rise faster productivity over the short run, but not over the long run. Now don't get me wrong, credit isn't necessarily something like bad that just causes cycles. It's bad when it finances overconsumption that can be paid back. However, it's good when it passionately allocates resources and produces income so you can pay back the debt. For example, if you borrow money to buy a big TV, that doesn't generate a company to pay back the debt. But if you borrow money to buy your tractor, and the tractor lets you harvest more crops and earn more money, then you can pay back your debt and improve your living standard. In an economy with credit, we can follow the transactions and see how credit create growth. Let me give you an example. Suppose you earn $100,000 a year and have no debt. You are credit worthy enough to borrow $10,000, say on a credit card. So you can spend $110,000 even though you only earn $100,000. Since your spending is another person's income, someone is earning $110,000. The person earning $110,000 with no debt can borrow $11,000. So he can spend $121,000, even though he has only earned $110,000. His spending is another person's income, and by following the transaction, we can begin to see how this process works in a self-reinforcing pattern. But remember, borrowing creates cycles, and if the cycle goes up, it eventually needs to come down. This leads us into the short-term debt cycle. As economic activity increases, we see an expansion. The first push of the short-term debt cycle. Spending continues to increase and prices start to rise. This happens because of increases in spending is fueled by credit, which can be created instantly out of thin air. As economic activity increases, we see an expansion the first phase of the short-term debt cycle. Spending continues to increase and prices start to rise. This happens because the increases in spending is fueled by credit, which can be created instant out of thin air. When the amount of spending and incomes grow faster than the production of goods, prices rise. When prices rise, we call this inflation. The central bank doesn't want too much inflation because it causes problems. Seeing prices rise, It raises interest rates. At higher interest rates, fewer people can afford to borrow money, and the cost of existing debt rises. Think about this as the monthly payments on your credit card going up. Because people borrow less and have higher debt repayments, they have less money left over to spend. So spending slows. And since one person's spending is another person's income, incomes drop, and so on and so forth. When people spend less, prices go down. We call this deflation. Economic activity decreases, and we have a recession. And if the recession becomes too severe and inflation is no longer a problem, the central bank will lower interest rates to cause everything to pick up again. With the low interest rates, debt repayments are reduced and borrowing and spending pick up. And we see another expansion. As you can see, the economy works like a machine. In the short-term debt cycle, spending is constrained only by the willingness of lenders and borrowers to provide and receive credit. When credit is easily available, there is an economic expansion. When credit is easily available, there is a recession. And note that this cycle is controlled primarily by the central bank. The short-term debt cycle typically lasts 5 to 8 years and happens over and over again for decades. But notice that the bottom and top of each cycle finish with more growth in the previous cycle and with more debt. Why? Because people perceive they have inclination by borrowing, spend more instead of paying back debt. It's human nature. Because of this, over long periods of time, debt rises faster than incomes. Credit created the long-term debt cycle. Despite people becoming more indebted, lenders even more fairly extend credit. Why? Because everyone thinks things are going great. People are just focused on what's been happening lately. And what's been happening lately? Incomes have been rising. Asset value is going up. The stock market lows. It's a boom. It pays to buy goods, services, and financial assets with borrowed money. When people do a lot of that, we call it a bubble. So even though debts have been growing, incomes have been growing nearly as fast to offset them. Let's call the ratio of debt to income the debt burden. So long as incomes continue to rise, the debt burden stays manageable. At the same time, asset values soar. People borrow huge amounts of money by buying assets as investments, causing their prices to rise even higher. People feel wealthy. So even with accumulation of lots of debt, rising incomes and asset value help borrowers remain creditworthy for a long time. But this obviously cannot continue forever, and it doesn't. But this obviously cannot continue forever, and it doesn't. Over a decade, that burden slowly increases, creating a large debt repayments. At some point, debt repayments start growing faster than incomes, forcing people to cut back on their spending. And since one person's spending is another person's income, incomes begin to go down, which makes people less creditworthy, causing borrowing to go down. Debt repayments continue to rise, which makes spending drop even further. And the cycle reverses itself. This is the long-term debt peak. Debt burdens have simply become too big. For the United States, Europe, and much of the rest of the world, this happened in 2008. It happened for the same reason it happened in Japan in 1989 and in the United States back in 1929. Now the economy begins with the leveraging. In the leveraging, People cut spending. Incomes fall. Credit disappear. Asset prices drop. Banks get squeezed. The stock market crashes. Social tensions rise and holding things or the peanut and syrup the other way. As incomes fall and the payments arise, borrowers get squeezed. No longer creditworthy, credit drives up, and borrowers can no longer borrow enough money to make their debt repayments. Scrambling to fill this hole, borrowers are forced to sell assets. The rush to sell assets flows the market at the same time as spending falls. This is when the stock market collapses, the real estate market tanks, and banks get into trouble. As asset prices drop, the value of the collateral borrowers can put up drops. This makes borrowers even less creditworthy. People fear poor, credit rapidly disappears. Less spending, less income, less wealth, less credit, less borrowing, and so on. It's obvious a vicious cycle. This feels similar to recession, but the difference here is that interest rates can be lowered to save the debt. In a recession, lowering interest rates works to stimulate borrowing. However, in the deleveraging, lowering interest rates doesn't work because interest rates are already low and soon hit 0%. So the stimulation ends. Interest rates in the United States hit 0% during the deleveraging of the 1930s and again in 2008. The difference between a recession and a deleveraging is that in a deleveraging, borrowers' debt burdens have simply gotten too big and can be relieved by lowering interest. Lenders realize that so becomes too large and eventually pay back, borrow and lost ability to repay, and the collateral lost value. They feel creeped by the debt. They don't even want more. Lenders drop lending, borrowers stop borrowing. Think of the economy as being not creditworthy, just like an individual. So what do you do about the leveraging? The problem debt burdens are too high and they must come down. There are 4 ways this can happen. 1. People, businesses, and governments cut their spending. 2. Debts are reduced through default and restructuring. 3. Wealth is redistributed from the haves to the have-nots. And finally, 4. The central bank prints new money. These 4 ways have happened in every deleveraging in modern history. Usually spending is cut first. As you just saw, people, businesses, and even governments tighten their belts and cut their spending so that they can pay down their debt. This is often referred to as austerity. When borrowers stop taking on new debts and start paying down old debt, you might expect the debt burden to decrease, but the opposite happens. Because spending is cut as one man's spending is another man's income, and one man's spending is another man's income, it causes incomes to fall. Therefore, faster than debts are repaid, and the debt burden actually gets worse. As we've seen, this cut in spending is deflationary and painful. Businesses are forced to cut costs, which means less jobs and higher employment. This leads to the next step. Debts must be reduced. Many borrowers find themselves unable to repay their loans, and the borrower's debt are lenders' assets. When a borrower doesn't repay the bank, people get nervous that the bank won't be able to repay them, so they rush to withdraw their money from the bank. Banks get squeezed, and people, businesses, and banks default on their debt. This severe economic contraction is a depression. A big part of depression is people discovering much of what they thought much was worth is really there. Let's go back to the bar. When you bought a beer and put it on a bar tab, you promise to repay the bar tab. Your promise became an asset value bar tab. But if you break a promise, if you don't pay it back in central default and bar tab, and the asset you had is really worth anything, it has basically disappeared. Many lenders don't want their asset to disappear and agree to debt restructuring. That structuring means lenders get paid back less, or get paid back over a longer time frame, or at a lower interest rate than was first agreed. Somehow, a contract is spoken in a way that reduces debt. Lenders would rather have a little of something than all of nothing, even though debt disappears. That structuring causes income can is an asset value to disappear faster, so the debt burden continues to get worse. Like current spending, debt reduction is also painful and deflationary. All of this impacts the central government because lower incomes and less employment means the government collects fewer taxes. At the same time, it needs to increase its spending because unemployment has risen. Many of unemployed have inadequate savings and need financial support from the government. Additionally, governments create stimulus plans and increases their spending to make up for the decreases in the economy. Government's budget deficit explode in the deleveraging because they spend more than they earn in taxes. This is what's happening when you hear about the budget deficit on the news. To fund their deficit, governments need to either raise taxes or borrow money. But with incomes falling and so many unemployed, where is the money going to come from? The rich. Since governments need more money, and since wealth is heavily concentrated in the hand of a small percentage of the people, governments naturally raises taxes on the wealthy, which facilitates a redistribution of wealth in the economy. The rich. Since governments need more money and since wealth is heavily concentrated in the hand of a small percentage of people, governments naturally raise taxes on the wealthy, which facilitates a redistribution of wealth in the economy. From the haves to have-nots, the have-nots will suffer and begin to resent the have. Wealthy have been squeezed by the weakened economy, falling asset prices, and high taxes that begin to resent the have-nots. If the depression continues, social disorder can break out. Not only the tension of incomes, they can arise between countries, especially in credit countries. This situation can lead to political change that can sometimes be extreme. In the 1930s, this led to Hitler coming to power, war in Europe, and depression in the United States. Pressure to do something to end the depression increases. Remember, most of what people thought was money was actually credit. So when credit is fear, people don't have enough money. People are desperate for money, and you remember who can print money, and central bank can. Having already lower interest rates or nearly zero forced printing money. Unlike current spending, debt reduction, and rate redistribution, printing money is inflationary and stimulus. Inevitably, the central bank prints new money out of thin air and uses it to buy financial assets and government bonds. It happened in the United States during the Great Depression, and again in 2008, when the United States Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, printed over $2 trillion. Other central banks around the world that could print a lot of money too. By buying financial assets with this money, it helps drive up asset prices, which makes people more creditworthy. However, this only helps those who own financial assets. You see, the central bank can print money, but it can only buy financial assets. The central bank governments, on the other hand, can buy goods and services and put money in the hands of the people, but it can't print money. So in order to stimulate the economy, the two must cooperate. By buying government bonds, the central bank essentially lends money to the government, allowing it to lower the deficit and increases spending on goods and services through stimulus programs and employment benefits. This increases spending income as well as the government's debt. However, it will lower the economy's total debt burden. This is about risk time. Policymakers need to balance the four ways that debt burdens come down. The deflationary waves need to balance with the inflationary waves in order to maintain stability. is balanced correctly, there can be a beautiful deleveraging. You say deleveraging can be ugly or can be beautiful. How can deleveraging be beautiful? Even though deleveraging is a difficult situation, handling difficult situation in the best possible way is beautiful, a lot more beautiful than the debt pure, unbalanced excess at the leveraging pace. In a beautiful deleveraging that decline relative to income, real economic growth is positive, and inflation isn't a problem. It is achieved by having the right balance. The right balance requires a certain mix of cutting spending, reducing debt, transferring wealth, and printing money so that economy and social stability can be maintained. People ask if printing money will raise inflation. It won't if it offsets plain credit. Remember, spending is what matters. A dollar of spending paid for with money has the same effect on prices as a dollar of spending paid for with credit. By printing money, the central bank can make up for the indifference of credit with an increase in the amount of money. In order to turn things around, the central bank needs to not only pump up income growth, but get the rate of income growth higher than the rate of interest on the accumulated debt. So what do I mean by that? Basically, incomes need to grow faster than the debt grows. For example, let's assume that debt control going toward leveraging is a debt to income ratio of 100%. That means that the amount of debt it has is the same as the amount of income the entire country makes in a year. Now think about the interest rate on that debt. Let's say into 2%. If debt is growing at 2% because of that interest rate and income is only growing at around 1%, you will never reduce the debt burden. You need to print enough money to get the rate of income grow above the rate of interest. However, printing money could easily be abused because it's so easy to do and people prefer into the alternative. The key is to avoid printing too much in money and causing unnecessarily high inflation, the way Germany did during its deleveraging in the 1920s. If policymakers achieve the right balance, deleveraging isn't so dramatic. Growth is slow, but the burdens go down. That's a beautiful deleveraging. When incomes begin to rise, borrowers begin to appear more creditworthy. And when borrowers appear more creditworthy, lenders begin to lend money again. That burdens finally begin to fall. Able to borrow money, people can spend more. Eventually, the economy begins to grow again, leading to the repression phase of the long-term debt cycle. Though the deleveraging process can be horrible if handled badly. If handled well, it will eventually fix the problems. It takes roughly a decade or more. It takes roughly a decade or more for debt burdens to fall and economic activity to get back to normal, hence the term lost decade. Activity to get back to normal, hence the term lost decade. In closing, of course, the economy is a little bit more complicated than this template suggests. However, laying the short-term debt cycle on top of the long-term debt cycle and then laying both of them on top of the productivity growth line gives a reasonably good template for staying where we've been, where we are now, and where we're probably headed. So in summary, there are 3 rules of thumb that I'd like to take away from this. First, don't have debt rise faster than income, because your debt burdens will eventually crush you. Second, don't have income rise faster than productivity, because you will eventually become uncomparable. And third, do all you can raise of your productivity, because in the long run, that's matter most. This is simple advice for you, and it's simply advice for policymaker. You might be surprised, but most people, including most policymakers, don't pay enough attention to this. This template has worked for me, and I hope it will work for you. Thank you.